Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hard Things Podcast. This is episode 22. Once again, if you have been following along, you're listening now. We're no longer going to have a season episode format, it's just going to be episodes going on forever. I hope someday, like I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast with Adam Sandler yesterday. I think it was like 2,688. I don't know. The number was extremely high. Many years of putting out regular podcasts. I mean, if you do one a week, that's 52 a year. You know, a couple hundred after a few years would be pretty cool. So, with that in mind, that's how the format's going to be. I like the freedom of having individual episodes kind of stand on their own, and also someday you could do part 1, part 2, part 3 of something if there's a very specific thing going on that requires that. But yeah, so excited to hear for the new format, excited about today's topic. So a little bit about what's going on in life right now at this moment. The Olympics finished up recently, which is always a cool topic, especially kind of getting 2 Olympics in the span of 3 years. Some people forget that 2020 Olympics were in 2021 due to COVID-19. So it feels like we got a lot of Olympics in a short amount of time. It feels like some athletes maybe got stiffed. Some athletes benefited from this happening in a short amount of time, but now, hopefully, all goes well in the next few years. We'll see LA Olympics on time, 2028. It's crazy to think what's going to happen between now and then. At least for me, I'll be a full-blown chiropractor by then. Once again, Lord willing. Things seem to be trending in the right direction for that. So, I also, speaking of that, just quick transition. I am now finished with trimester 2 of chiropractic school. 3 final exams yesterday out of the many courses I was taking. Kind of a bit of a meat grinder, but I got at least a good enough grade on one of them to eke out an A overall in the class. Other 2 ended up getting B's. In the classes. One of them I did have a chance for an A, but that was just one of those tests, Sometimes you take a test and you're just like, man, I prepared on the wrong things, or I focused a little too much on one subject and not enough on another. Maybe you forget about something from early on in the term, and yeah, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. So, but yeah, glad overall to be succeeding. And glad to take that knowledge into the next step. And with that, I do have an 18-day break. So basically we get 2 weeks off, but finishing exams on Wednesday means that starting today, Thursday, August 15th, I believe. Yes, August 15th, halfway through August already, which is insane. I have just an nearly unlimited amount of time on my hands. I am coaching CrossFit this afternoon. 4 hours, 4 jam-packed hours of fitness that I'll be delivering to a group of people. But it's strange not to really have any responsibilities, because over the course of this term with school, it just felt like a manageable amount of responsibility and taking care of business. And now, I don't know, you just get so in the rhythm, you want to just keep going, but I'll find a way to relax for sure. I think it might just take 24 to 48 hours, who knows. But yeah, I'm excited for this time off, and in this time off I'll be working to keep honing my craft on this show, be reading some books, be catching up on some old TV shows, listening to some podcasts. Joe Rogan had a couple good episodes, like I said. Adam Sandler, Adam Ray, kind of the old school and the new school of comedians. And yeah, so all those things together, thinking about recent events. We were talking about CrossFit a little bit last week. We had school. We got, Madison Square Garden, Kill Tony show. Kill Tony, #1 live podcast in the world. One of my favorite shows that I should probably catch up on as well. With the Olympics, and just think about the most important things in our lives, our relationships, our jobs, the election coming up. There's a lot of topics in life. And kind of at the core of those are kind of relationships and feedback. I think if I had to whittle down to the core of what being human is right now in this time, it really is, your ability to be human, to be the best human you can possibly be, is determined on your ability to give and receive feedback in a productive way. So today's episode is going to be a lot on feedback. I'm going to talk about different scenarios, talk about more so just like posing questions, not really passing judgment. I think it's easy to pass judgment. So for me, it's more so when I see a situation from the outside or a situation from the inside that I'm in, and how am I thinking of it from my perspective. I think just sharing those thoughts might get someone else thinking. Whoever's listening to this podcast still, hopefully it's going to be more people in the future. I'm going to start posting a little bit more, promoting it more, now that I kind of got out of that hellacious trimester with school and got away from some of the things that happened earlier this year. I'm excited to promote this and work towards a future of maybe some more feedback, more better feedback for everyone. Because I think that's ultimately how we progress. So I'm just going to start by talking through, I just made a list of different areas where feedback exists and kind of my experience with them. So bringing it back to the Olympics. The Olympics is kind of the ultimate form of feedback. And that's why everyone, I think, admires the Olympics so much, is because these people put so much time into perfecting their craft or their sport. And you kind of, that sacrifice is kind of like a noble sacrifice, especially it's for your country, the place where you live, place where you grew up, you were born. And in its purest form, is this pure competition. It is like kind of the ultimate reward. Like, you're the best in the world at that discipline. And the Olympics also is a mega money machine. They tried adding, new sports like breaking, which got unceremoniously dumped. Will not be happening at the Los Angeles Olympics. Seems like there was some controversy there. And won't mention her by name, but a specific breaker that I just don't know what I was watching. And it's definitely not the same as like a swimming event or a track and field event or weightlifting. So things that have been happening in the Olympics for decades. I think we're pretty good without breaking. But that's just me. I'm not a break dancer. Maybe I'd feel different if I was. But even at the Olympics, there's kind of subjective things that happen, especially a sport like gymnastics, uber popular, been around a long time. But they kind of have rankings for difficulties of tricks, and then you see someone do the trick and like their execution of it could be judged, by however many judges there are, all kinds of different ways. And in a way, the human error kind of gets into it. And this is kind of the essence of feedback is we're definitely not perfect as a race. I don't claim to be perfect. But it's kind of all about what you focus on. And I will say as I've gotten older, I've focused more and more on feedback, giving and receiving it. I'm not as good at giving it as I am receiving it, I think. At least right now. That's because I've really struggled to receive it in the past. So that struggle has created some opportunities for me to learn. I would say, struggle more at giving it to this day, but we can get more into that when I get into some more pointed scenarios. But the Olympics is kind of the ultimate form of feedback. So if we value this, we value people putting all this time, the theme there is we kind of, I don't know the best way to say it. We value someone else doing it with their time, but when it comes to us making a sacrifice, I think it's a little bit harder. It's like, oh, well, that's for them. They're the Olympian. I'm just a XYZ. I'm an accountant. Who cares? Well, you could be the best accountant in the world and just take solace in the fact that you're the best accountant, but people kind of let their greatness fall by the wayside because they think it doesn't matter. But I can tell you it does matter. And feedback is how you become that best person. And even if you never become the best, you're going to become pretty good, and you're going to provide a lot of value to those people around you and the people in your life. So that's why this is all worth it. The second area, I kind of mentioned it, but Kill Tony is number one live podcast in the world. You go on YouTube, you can watch it every Monday. They're starting to do arena shows. They did Madison Square Garden recently. It's absolutely insane to watch because at one point, Tony, kind of near and dear to my heart, is from Ohio. He went out to LA and just was doing open mics and tried to be a stand-up comedian, and he found his niche kind of as a roaster. Anytime the roasts were on Comedy Central, or recently even the Tom Brady roast, he's there with Jeff Ross, the roast master general, kind of writing. So he found his niche, but what I appreciate about him is that he never really stopped trying to evolve. Like, he found his niche as a roaster. He could just roast people all the time, which he does. But he also was developing this podcast, and ultimately what it is a feedback machine. So he gives new comedians a minute. They get pulled out of a bucket, so they kind of don't know if you're going to go on. And you come up and you do your best minute, and then they'll critique you, make fun of you. So he does roast them, and it can make for a lot of fun, spontaneous action. And it's become this mega hit. And I think it's because, once again, deep down, subconsciously, unconsciously, we all appreciate someone kind of putting forth their best effort and then getting critiqued on it. And it's like an honorable thing. Just like sacrificing your time and effort to go win a medal at the Olympics is, putting yourself out there, getting up on stage is really hard to do. I can tell you because I did it myself. And it's something I want to continue to do. I just don't know how it fits in time-wise. I really want to give a lot more time to it than I could afford to right now. But I want to work it back in because it's so valuable. It's a really public way of receiving feedback. I mean, if you get up there and you tell jokes and nobody laughs, that's information. That's very good information. It's very accurate, very piercing, but also could be very motivating, to understand hey, I need to, keep it moving, keep writing, keep trying, and I think one of the hardest things to do is to know when to give up. So back to the Joe Rogan, Adam Sandler podcast, they talked about so much about how they were both terrible at comedy when they were doing stand-up at first. And I can tell you, I had some good sets. I had some really bad sets. I didn't do enough of it to really, get too deep into it to say whether I was good or bad, but I had experienced both moments, highs and lows. And I can tell you, just like those guys and just like Tony, the persistence really goes a long way. So you can go bomb a bunch of times, but all it takes is one really good set, the ability to get enough confidence, enough good jokes, written in the background, and then practicing delivering them, and like just those reps, like eventually you'll get pretty good at it. And I think the hard thing about that is you just never know if you're going to be a star. For every Joe Rogan and Adam Sandler, there's probably, a dozen others that just never made it. You just never got that famous. Never made it on TV, never made it in movies, never commentated UFC, never built an early podcast that became a, Spotify sensation. So it's just hard to know when to quit, because those guys will admit that they were terrible. And at some point, even Joe said, like, I would tell my younger self to quit doing comedy. You're horrible. So you kind of have to take feedback with a grain of salt. You have to know yourself. Definitely know thyself. Like, are you willing to take a beating to have success? And if you get to the point where you kind of have success, but you never get to that ultimate like stardom where you're in a movie or a series, you don't become Adam Sandler and Joe Rogan, but you become pretty good at comedy and you can pretty much go to any club and do a set. Like, would you be okay with that? Giving up all that time and energy. It's like this trade-off of how much energy do you put into it versus what do you get out of it. And those two guys and Tony now doing shows at the Madison Square Garden, like obviously all their energy paid off. I think that's what's really tough. And that brings me to the third topic of school. So for me, I did undergrad at Harvard. I've talked about it before on the podcast, but going to Harvard to play football is like taking on 2 full-time jobs, and one of them, you essentially bash your head against other people and work out a bunch. You're like physically exhausted, and then you go try to do school and you're mentally exhausted. And like, if you're not operating at 100% and you're someone like me who's trying to kind of come up, and I'm punching above my weight class, it's a recipe. It can be a recipe for disaster, and there's a lot of struggle there. And like the amount of energy I put in to try and succeed, I don't know. I definitely hit my ceiling there, for sure. And, I could have gone somewhere like Ohio State, which was kind of a school in my mind growing up, just been a student or, whatever, and probably done really well on the school side, and just, gave up the football career. You never know until it's over. But now that it's over, I was kind of rewarded by finally being an Ivy League champion my senior year with the football side, and I graduated from Harvard, so I have the diploma. Like, those are quote unquote rewards, but there's really nothing I could do with those afterwards. I mean, I ultimately could have done what I wanted to do without playing football there or getting that degree. I ended up working at a company like Rogue Fitness in my hometown that I was really stoked on, because they were supplying the CrossFit Games with equipment, and I liked the exercise world. Competitive fitness, just kind of always in my blood. Olympic weightlifting, wrestling, football. Like, sports are just a thing I love, and being in the gym is something I love. So I didn't need to go to Harvard or play football there to do what I wanted to do, and eventually get into coaching and work for companies like Whoop and Laco and Thorne. Needed a college degree for some of those, but it didn't have to be from Harvard. It could have been from Ohio State. It could have been from, anywhere that I could have got into. which, to be fair, was a lot of places. So I say that knowing how much energy I put into it and then what I ultimately got out of it and how it related to what I wanted to do in life, and it just wasn't worth it. I mean, now, I will say in my recent pivot to chiropractic school, my experience at Harvard, I think will lend itself greatly to kind of the new side of life. But again, the reason I got here to this point kind of so late, relating to some of the symptoms I had from, traumatic brain injury and concussions. So without those concussions, I would have never tried chiropractic as a way to help my symptoms, and found it was effective for myself, and got curious and wanted to go pursue that as a way to help other people with concussions. But I also maybe could have been a chiropractor sooner. So would I be a different chiropractor or worse chiropractor? Like, who knows? And I'm just saying all these thought experiments are just to try and understand for the now. Like, for what I'm doing now, how can I take those lessons and apply it to what I'm doing so that I can be the most effective person possible? So all of these thought experiments are really generated to give myself feedback and to be helpful. And in terms of school as well, so being back in school, I was talking about finals. You're getting grades on these tests. And I'll be honest, there are two specific courses that I wasn't super stoked on. They were continuations of courses I took last term. And it really, honestly, was just trying to get them out of the way. I know some of what I was learning is going to be applicable, but it seemed just kind of like a filler a little bit. It's just the sense that I got from the teacher and like how serious they were taking it. They're spread a little bit thin, and just knowing how my practice will look in the future, there's going to be some of it I need to know, but do I need to know it to that extent? Probably not. I need to really master it at a level where I can explain it to a patient, which is going to be way surface level compared to what we're learning. And those courses, I basically locked up a B in those courses, and I could get 100% on the final, and it would still be like an 89%, not quite an A. And so I just went into those finals just, hey, I got to get a 12% to get a B, 81%. And I'd be lying if I said, I didn't spend more time on the other finals where I could still get an A. And, I think big sign of growth here for me is I would have killed myself to get 100% on all my finals in the past, whereas now I kind of know where my energy needed to go to get essentially the same result. So how much effort did I put in to get that same result? Turned out to be magic. And speaking of magic, a little intermission here off of the examples, but kind of halfway through this episode, I want to talk a little bit about values. So feedback really hinges on values and what your values are. If you value having a lot of money, that's going to be a lens through which you view feedback. This job I'm doing, is it going to help me make a lot of money? And I think a lot of people get stuck on levels of feedback like that, where they may be, like I was just saying about the test, it's another thing to get 100% on a test is like having a, hyper profitable job. But the amount of effort you have to get 100 versus like, what do I need to live? What do I need to just pass and get that B, get the next best grade? If I can't improve it to an A, then let's take a B, and let's take a B at an 80.5% and just be cool. And same thing for profitability. It's like, hey, if I can spend more time with my family, I can make a new friend, I can go work out, I can do all this other stuff and still make a living. Why kill yourself for 80-hour weeks to get an extra, $5,000, let's say, and even $20,000. I think at a certain point, it's just, if you have confidence in yourself, maybe when you're like young and single, maybe you grind to make that extra money, but as you grow older, it's time to transition to valuing other things. So with the values, like there's kind of this magical area you get into where you can start to find this equilibrium. And I find that magic comes when you get good feedback from someone and you're a coachable person. So if you're receptive to that feedback and it's good feedback, that's magical. And it's very rare that you are going to be coachable and get that good feedback. Good feedback's generally pretty rare. Because once again, when I say good feedback, I mean feedback that is applicable to your values. And it's also coming from someone that likely holds similar values or at least understands your values. And I think where I've gone wrong in the past is either being not coachable, not receptive to that particular person. So maybe a lack of respect or a lack of self-respect. And then also that person not having my values in mind when giving the feedback. So maybe they had kind of higher values in mind and I wasn't there yet, or vice versa. And so that, again, good feedback to a coachable person is magical. Good feedback to someone who's not coachable means you're going to be stagnant. You take that, but maybe you don't use it. Bad feedback to someone who's coachable can mean confusion, maybe lower self-worth. Maybe you don't understand the values they're coming from and they don't match up with yours. And you kind of feel this tension and you don't know why. But you also are coachable and you're kind of susceptible to feedback. Like you're like, hey, I want to try and implement this, but like something doesn't feel right. So again, confusion, or if you have low self-esteem, it hits you at the right time, a time when you're down, maybe you bombed, in comedy, and then someone comes up and tells you you're terrible and you quit, you never become Joe Rogan. And then finally, bad advice to a not coachable person is kind of moot. So that little Punnett square, was something I drew up earlier, something I was thinking about, and there's ways to expand that out. It's a very simplistic version, but I think keeping it simple sometimes is a good thing. So we want to endeavor to be open and coachable and also get good feedback from a good person who at least understands your values. So I think that's where we all get a lot of trouble. And even in school, a liberal arts school for a conservative person can get a little dicey. There's a million scenarios I can talk about. But enough for a halftime intermission. I want to get into the fitness world. So CrossFit class, like I'm about to go teach here in a moment, and Olympic weightlifting, specifically with USA Weightlifting. So the past 18 months, I have been riddled with injury. And tried to compete again in March and didn't make weight. And to be honest, it wasn't going to go well. My body's still kind of falling apart. So I was okay not making weight. Kind of just worked out in my favor. I am really happy, though, because I'll be competing on September 1st. So a couple days from now, I'm in good enough shape to put up a decent total again, and going to try to step back on the platform. But in my absence of competition, I decided to still try to be involved with the community, go see my friends, lift in training halls, by being a judge. So there's a competition where USA Weightlifting offered to pay for hotel and meals and everything in North Carolina last December. And I said, hey, you know what? I'm not doing anything. I'm just in school, taking a couple courses, and it's easy. So I will go down and kind of volunteer my time. So I went down there. And what I realized from judging all those sessions, there's a certain amount of sessions I had to work, to kind of earn my keep, my free hotel room and all the food that we got. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of good weightlifting, a lot of bad weightlifting. And I think, people can be pretty sensitive in terms of, good lift versus bad lift. And there's some standards, like in CrossFit, where if you don't hit those standards, those rules, elbows locking out, different things like not touching the barbell with your foot. There's a lot of things you have to watch out for as a judge. And you ultimately have to call people out on if they do it. And one thing I noticed is we had 3 judges on every platform. So I'd always be with 2 other judges. Sometimes it would be former Olympians, like Fred Lowe, for anyone who knows that name. I can't imagine many do unless you're involved in weightlifting. He's pretty OG in weightlifting, but and then it could be someone who has maybe just been weightlifting for like a year or so and hasn't really competed nationally at all. And so someone with far less experience. And I found that everybody made mistakes. I'm sure myself included. There are times where I wanted some calls back. I'd press the wrong button and kind of wish I didn't. That happened a handful of times for me. So I imagine it happened a handful of times for other people too. Which is why ultimately you have 3. But there are those times when maybe 2 people make a mistake at the same time and something strange happens. So we did have a call overturned in one of the top sessions, and I felt pretty weird about it myself. That was feedback for myself. But especially with the kids, so you want the kids to succeed and have a good time, and you want them to come back. And of course they pay the money. The entry fees kind of help fund the organization and the event. So you don't want people to feel bad, per se. But you also want to give them feedback so they know what's wrong and what they need to improve on. So there's kind of a balance to it. If it's a razor's edge call and someone was working really hard, you could just tell. They're working hard and they're, doing it, and it's not for medals, it's not for a national championship, it's not for going to the Olympics. Hey, you know what? We'll give it to them. But, someone does something egregious and it's just like super obvious, like I'm definitely going to tell them, like, hey, you can't do that. So over the course of the weekend, I just noticed maybe other judges being a little bit more lenient on average than I would. And again, that's just my values versus their values, their understanding of what's happening in that scenario. Maybe what they've been told by other judges, like who knows. But it was different. Their viewpoints were different on giving that feedback. And I just thought it was really interesting. I feel like I learned a lot. Especially in a low stakes environment, like a lift, no lift, it's kind of over within a minute and who cares? Like move on. That person's going to leave there, go to dinner, and they're not even going to remember what happened. But it was just a really interesting microcosm. And I'll say the same thing about CrossFit. So coaching CrossFit again, you have these people who are paying, sometimes like over $200 a month for these classes. And it's funny because you hear people say like, hey, we want coaches who are active in coaching, but you coach them and the first thing they do is like come back, they like clap back, and it's like, all right, well, I've been doing this for over 10 years. And if I saw something that made me want to speak up to you, I'm not saying it for my own benefit. So you're paying to be here. You don't have to listen to me. But you could, and it's what you say you wanted. So it creates this kind of ego tension. And I think in weightlifting too, like the barbell doesn't lie. You either lift the bar or you don't. You get that bar overhead and someone turns down your lift because your elbow was a little saggy. It can be upsetting and like disappointing. Or for someone to tell you that your air squats are not going low enough. You're shortchanging yourself. Are your quads still doing a lot of work when you're doing a, 1/3 or a quarter squat. Yeah, like your knees are bending, your hips are flexing. Sure. But is that how it's supposed to be done? No. So when I'm coaching, a lot of times I try to get to know people by first name basis. I try to offer a helpful tip. I offer kind of an open forum, like, hey, if you have questions, please come to me. Try to make sure they know it's like an open door policy, and I'll give you my 2 cents. Especially when someone's in the middle of a workout, I'm not stopping their workout to tell them something. I might tell them after, or I might not tell them at all, because ultimately for me, it's kind of a judgment call. Like, is this information really going to help this person? Is it something they care about? As I get to know them and I figure out that it will help them, then I go for it. But a lot of times, I would say about 70% of the time, the person's not going to be receptive. Again, if someone's not coachable and you give them good advice, they're going to be stagnant anyways. Kind of in my little Punnett square that I made up with. So, yeah, it's really all about being coachable and receptive. If I find someone that is, I'll coach them all day. But I definitely won't waste my breath for someone that, I can tell doesn't have the same values. And it's just, if you're in it for a different reason, that's cool. You're paying for this. The world is your oyster. But yeah, I think I've always struggled with maintaining that balance of, I'm not going to be confrontational, but I am going to provide the feedback. Like, you can have it if you want it. You're going to self-select. And that's something that I think is really valuable. And there's times too where, I'm not going to lie, I do step in, especially if it's dangerous. So that's the thing. The one time where I'll always give feedback is if I can tell the movement is dangerous, putting someone in harm's way. That's not what you want. So yeah, ultimately, you gotta be ready to step in if someone's really gonna hurt themselves. Maybe it's not in the moment. Maybe after class, it's like, hey, that movement pattern, you can see your hips are shifting in your squat over time. That could cause tendonitis and all kinds of problems down the chain. So you want to get that looked at, start, maybe elevating your heels, just give them a little something to keep it moving. And if they use it, they use it. If they don't, they don't. But at least in that case, it's worth saying something, because you might be able to save someone from, weeks of rehab or whatever it may be. So we're getting pretty deep into this episode. I'm going to try to close it out quickly. The next phase I want to go into is jobs. So at your job, again, this is kind of where money comes into it. And you can tell, like with the Olympics, with school, with CrossFit class, with weightlifting, you've heard me mention like money. The Olympics is incentivized to make it glorious so people will watch. School, you're paying tuition, so like they want to, give you feedback, but they also want to make sure you're still paying the tuition. And CrossFit class, you're paying all this money a month. Like, I don't want to piss someone off and have them quit or change to a different gym, but I also want to keep them from getting hurt. So money a lot of times is a corrupting thing. And I've noticed this especially in jobs. So people, the values at the top in the C-suite, the owners of the company, are major, massive. And like at the end of the day, you have to remember they're going to do what they need to do for their own success, for the company's success. And they could be dead wrong. But if they get it in their head, that's how it's going to be. That's how it's going to be. And you just have to know that those values are not aligned again. And when they're giving you feedback, you have to take that with a grain of salt, knowing that they're giving you feedback based on their goals, not based on your goals or maybe what you're seeing as like moving the needle on the front lines, because they're not doing your job. They don't have that context. So it's a really tough spot to be in, because if you just go along with everything you do what they say to the letter, but then the company doesn't make enough money or they don't hit the goals, you're going to get fired. But you did everything they said. You're going to get let go, even though, you did everything to the letter. So, and the opposite's also true. Like, you could defy them, they could fire you, but say they didn't fire you, you would have succeeded, the goals and the targets are all hit. They're never going to admit that you were right. And maybe in some companies, some scenarios, they have that culture. But a lot of cultures, a lot of companies don't have enough runway to have that little splash of liberalism within the kind of daily grind. So I've always found that really interesting. And ultimately, too, when it comes down to your livelihood, your ability to pay your bills, you kind of have to go along with things that maybe you don't feel so good about. And you know that you could get let go because you did what they asked. So at the end of the day, like, corporate America is a very frustrating place for a lot of people. Climbing the corporate ladder, you can manipulate the shit out of bosses and owners and get everything you want. But at the end of the day, you could end up hurting a lot of people in the process to get what you need. And then you have to live with it. Are you good with it? Well, yeah, I'm surviving. I'm thriving. I'm good with it. And some people just aren't going to be good with it. I want the best for everyone. I want the best for the company, and working towards the most optimal solution versus what's going to get you there. Sometimes maybe you have to be selfish and get yourself taken care of, and then maybe you can put other people's oxygen mask on. But that's, again, values. What do you value? And when I realize in the past, maybe I was a little bit vulnerable, I needed the money, and the company was a little bit vulnerable and they needed the money, and we thought our values were aligned and we thought we could do good together, and we both found out that we were wrong. Just sucks. It's just something that happens. And ultimately, in my path, it led me to chiropractic school, which ended up being pretty cool. I could probably spend a whole podcast alone on this, but I think we see it too in romantic relationships. And again, back to the money thing, sometimes in a relationship, one partner or another makes more money, and that makes you kind of put up with some bullshit. If one person's a provider, what they say kind of goes, unless you can take care of yourself. So I do feel for those out there who are in relationships where they're a little bit financially vulnerable and have to put up with bullshit. But I think there is a way where you can give feedback that ultimately, sends a message. There's things you can do that maybe aren't financial related that takes care of that person, that you can create some balance. So there's always something you can do. And eventually too, making a plan to figure out how to get out of there is one thing. But yeah, things I think too, when you kind of get that puppy love in the beginning of a relationship, you let some things slide. That person gets some bad habits. You're not giving them that feedback because you're afraid they're going to leave. But then you get a couple years deep, and you're both locked in, but there's these bad habits that linger. That's how you get divorce. Divorce rates are climbing ever higher and higher, I think, because people let people get away with too much shit. At the end of the day, some people just don't want to be alone, so they just put up with it. And I think everyone out there that's listening, everyone that's not listening, you deserve better than that. But the best relationships are where people give good feedback to each other and they're both coachable and they have the same values. So that kind of irons itself out if you value the same things, and you have to just do that work to find out. And find out, it could be the hottest woman in America, but if she doesn't have the right values, you can't have her. It's not going to work out. I mean, you can have her for a little bit, but you are going to break up. She's going to take half your shit. So just keep that in mind. And last but not least, I think it's coming down the pipe pretty soon, and it's on a lot of people's minds, but the election. Ultimate form of feedback, ultimate popularity contest, Republican versus Democrat. First it was Donald versus Joe. Joe's clearly, on the back end of his, career and even life at this point. I mean, he's so old when he got into office, and now the presidency is, sucked the life out of him as it has every other president, seemingly, except for Donald Trump. I don't know how Trump is still, seemingly looks okay. And still giving like 90-minute speeches. It's insane. But I think that feedback for Donald Trump was, seemingly Republicans were excited about going against Joe, and they were able to kind of tell him, like, hey, you're a little too old. And Democrats are like, yeah, you are a little too old. And now Kamala Harris is in for the Democrats, and for better or for worse, she's a lot younger. She's has more diversity, being a person of color and a woman. And that the whole thing just shakes up. And so now Donald versus Kamala, like, what is the new equilibrium? What's the feedback there? I can tell you a lot of people in America are kind of comfortable with what we had before Joe. When, Donald Trump was in office, COVID happened. He kind of dealt with the aftermath of that. And so there's not a whole lot of good feedback out there on, like, what's the best option. And I think in either case, we get a lot of shit to deal with. And we have a lot of feedback for each other. I mean, I think no matter who wins, we have to do a better job of giving and receiving feedback. There's a lot of... I myself, find myself to be pretty moderate politically. I can see both sides of almost every issue, and maybe that's why I've struggled to give and receive feedback, is because I kind of see it all, kind of understand. What I think we need, though, it's kind of the extremes, the poles of the Republicans and the Democrats, where those people get a little bit too far away from reality, and the feedback needs to be implemented and received. And our problem is those values of the extremes, they almost become more similar. It brings me back to horseshoe theory. One of my favorite kind of revelations I've had is that the extremes are more similar than the middle. Your far right Republicans and far left Democrats, they have more in common at this point. Their stances on the issues are different, but the way they act, the way they try to impose their will, the way they try to give feedback, and the way that they do not receive feedback, seemingly, it's a little crazy. I think, when America's at its best, it's when our values mostly align. It's good to have competition and struggle and, let's figure out what the best idea is, but it changed from figuring out the best idea to, like, I will win at all costs. And that's not good for anyone. Then you really genuinely have psychopaths that are in there. And you, when you're fighting monsters, you must endeavor not to become a monster yourself. And that's, I think, when it comes to feedback, my main fear is I don't want to step off that cliff and become a monster, because that doesn't align with my values, but it seems to be what you have to do to get your point across. So instead of that, I think I'll opt for the Kill Tony route, the Joe Rogan, the Adam Sandler, and that is the route of consistency. Like I said, this new podcast format has me excited. I can't wait to be consistent, do it at least weekly, and get to the point where I got a couple hundred episodes under my belt, and try to be someone that gives feedback, receives feedback, and is an example of consistency. Because I think that's the most important thing we could do, is show up every day and be the best we can be at giving and receiving feedback, implementing that, and executing on our vision, being the best we can for our communities, for our families, for ourselves. And sometimes it can seem a little bit boring. So as much as I can, I think I see it as my values and my vision leading to making that more exciting for people. You don't have to be on the edges. You don't have to be extreme to be exciting and to be excited. You can wake up, kind of have a thrill, an excitement for life without going to the extremes. That's something I think I've always done. Maybe the best lesson I've learned recently is, it's okay to be moderate. It's okay to, enjoy life, but also it's okay to work hard. It's okay to reevaluate, readjust. You're not a flopper. If you change stances on something, it's because you got better information, and it's like, people might say you're untrustworthy because you flopped, but I think you're more trustworthy because you're willing to admit that you're wrong. And we just value winning and being right so much, but to win and to be right, kind of have to be wrong first sometimes. Not always. So I say this with excitement because I think it's a big puzzle to figure out as humans try to evolve through this next iteration of life. And I hope we can do so without some kind of correction from Mother Nature, which often comes in the form of natural disaster, war, whatever it may be. I hope we can avoid that. Maybe not. But no matter what happens, I'll be here fighting for the moderation, the implementation of feedback, the receiving of it, the developing better feedback, and cultivation of patience, this might as well be the boring podcast. I'm going to change it to boring, but it is a hard thing to do everything I'm talking about. So Hard Things Podcast will be here for you. This is the end of episode 22, but I think the beginning of something potentially great, long term. So here for the long term, for consistency, this is Blaine Burgess, and I will see you all next week.